Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second workshop in Private Practice Essentials. Redbird Therapy is so happy to be welcoming Anne Rogerson tonight. And she's going to talk about social media and what we need to think about as therapists. Anne has been a student and then an associate with Redbird Therapy, so I personally know her and have had, it's just been such a delight working with her. She's a smart cookie. And for me, as an older therapist who never did social media, she was my learning curve. It was really great to have her with Redbird and helping us take some step forward as a company and putting ourselves out into the world in a way that is not so familiar to those of us who might be a bit older. I am going to hand the reins over to Anne for this evening. Again, if you have any questions, put them up into the chat box. We'll get to them as we can, and there'll be times where you can unmute and ask directly. But welcome, and we're really happy to have you all here. It's so amazing for me, like as clinical director at Redbird Therapy. I just love hosting these kind of events. And to see the faces of my colleagues who I see on our listservs, and I know you are all out there doing incredible work. So it is just a joy to be doing some of this learning together. Over to you, Anne.
Okay, thanks so much, Barbara. So as I was introduced, my name is Anne, and I'm super excited to be here this evening just to walk everyone through social media use as a psychotherapist. So we'll jump into our agenda, if I can get to the next slide. There we go. So we're going to start first just by exploring some of my social media experience. We're going to look at why we should use social media, selecting the right platform for your social media goals, how to build a following, how to define a niche, all those really important things that you'll need to know for actually using social media. Then we're going to take a look at CRPO considerations. So assuming everyone here is with the CRPO, this is going to be hopefully super helpful for you and just some considerations to keep in mind. We're then going to look at some of your next steps, more as like a guide that you can use, as well as some questions, my contact, and then we're going to finish with Barbara just sharing some information. So to jump in, taking a look a little bit at my social media experience. So I predominantly use Instagram as my social media platform of choice. So I originally started this Instagram account, Mental Health Wellness, back in 2020 when I was still a student practicing or learning to practice psychotherapy. And I started an Instagram account really to dive into the content that I was learning in school. So it was a creative outlet to, explore different modalities and just really understand the material. But quickly, my Instagram account kind of grew and it changed into a way that I could use Instagram as a way to market myself. So I was able to market myself to my ideal client and really build a brand and develop an online voice and community. So it's been a really fun ride over the past 4 years, and lots of fun, lots of growth, collaborations, and we're going to talk about all that stuff. So to start off, though, I do have some opening questions and question slides. So feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. But what is your goal for using social media? So why is social media of interest to you as a psychotherapist? What do you hope to achieve with it? If you want to put some things into the chat or you can unmute yourself. We kind of want this to be interactive and not very lecture style. So feel free to do that if you'd like to. And Barbara, if you want to just read out if anything comes up, that would be great. And if no one wants to, that's totally fine too.
Well, I might just start and see if there's a few others who might want to pop in. I know for me, when I moved from working in sole proprietorship to having associates with me and students with me, it really changed the nature of my responsibility in terms of creating a funnel for clients, to find out about the service that we do, to try and create a little bit of okay, well, who who am I? Who is this Redbird? And what do we offer? What are the specific
Yeah.
things we do? Because we specialize around trauma. So it really was important for me to think, what do I want out in the world and who do I want to engage with? Okay, there are some pieces coming in here, which is great.
Amazing.
Yeah, Pat has said he wanted to develop his ability to express his thoughts and ideas publicly. That's awesome. Mindy, connect with potential clients, promote offerings, things like workshops and things that might be non-clinical.
Yeah.
Andra saying more of a social justice focus to dispel the myths about the aesthetics and focus on intersectionality. That's amazing.
Oh, wonderful.
What a
Yes,
beautiful, sorry. Yeah, what a beautiful goal to bring into social media.
absolutely.
Uh,
Do you want
Emma
to do one
saying,
or two more, Barbara?
yeah, there's one more here.
Perfect.
Emma saying to reach a younger demographic who uses social media as a primary source of information. That's great.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to that. So I have some slides that show demographic use per platform. So you might find that super helpful. So like most of you had said, I did brainstorm some ideas and I was like, what was I using social media for? And I think we've all kind of come to these conclusions. So marketing yourself to your ideal client. So turning followers into clients or building an audience that might buy your courses, your workshops, things like that. So those are just some goals, but I love the goals that were shared. So fantastic. So
Can
this is
I add one quickly thing in here because this last comment just came up and I think it's relevant for our conversation tonight. And Carol wrote, I'm very uncomfortable with social media in general, and I often think it's more harmful than not. So I'm curious about the experience of using it positively in a psychotherapeutic space. And Mindy said, yeah, me too. So I think I think a lot of therapists are going to be asking this question.
absolutely. And that's a really great question because you are absolutely right. Social media can have a negative connotation with it and can be used obviously in a harmful way that could rupture relationships with clients and things like that. So we're going to talk about that when we get to the CRPO considerations and how to use it in a safe, ethical manner that respects boundaries and all those things and can be used in a positive way. So for now, we're going to look at why you might want to use social media as a therapist. So number one, social media can really help you to gain exposure and set yourself apart. Secondly, social media, depending on your niche and what you're posting about, it can help to establish you as someone who's credible. So for example, if your niche or what you focus on is primarily, let's say, health anxiety, and you're only posting about health anxiety, you might make yourself kind of a credible person in that domain. So individuals who struggle with health anxiety can come across your account and say, oh my goodness, this person knows what they're talking about. I want to connect with them. It can also help with authenticity because you do want to be a little bit real on social media. We don't want to necessarily be like a blank canvas and all those things, which you can be absolutely. But when you're a little bit yourself and can show your personality, it can help clients to connect with you that way as well. Number three, professional networking. So social media provides a really great opportunity for you to network with other therapists or other mental health professionals through collaborations and things like that. Social media is also usually free, so it can be an easy, cheap alternative to paid advertisements and things like that. Most importantly, probably, is that you can target your ideal client. So you can focus on the presenting concerns that you might want to work with and focus your content on that kind of material. You can also build a community and gain trust with your followers. There's the possibility of generating brand deals with other companies. I personally don't usually do this, but people do. So that's something that you can do with caution. And of course, it increases accessibility to mental health content. So as we all know, therapy isn't always accessible for everyone. And I'm not suggesting that social media replaces therapy, but social media can definitely provide an avenue for someone to say, I can relate to this, which they might not have otherwise. And we're going to move on to the next slide here. So another quick question, and we're going to jump into social media platforms now. So the question is, what platform specifically are you thinking about using for your social media? So for example, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Is there anything that kind of comes up for you, or would you want to do like multiple platforms? If you want to just put it in the chat, you can do that. And while people share their experiences or what they're thinking. Personally, I just went with Instagram because I was familiar with Instagram. And for me, it was just the easiest alternative instead of trying to learn a new one. I'll be honest, I also tried TikTok because I was like, oh, it's the same thing. Not really. It's similar, but it's not identical. And I quickly just stayed with Instagram and left the TikTok behind. um, Barbara, is there stuff in the chat going on here?
So far, most folks are saying either Instagram or Instagram and Facebook, mostly
Okay.
based on familiarity.
Yeah. It's easy to do what you know, right? And keep in mind too, social media can be very time consuming. So if you're already familiar with the content or the platform, it just makes things a lot easier. So for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going. And just a heads up for this presentation, I'm focusing on the 5, I would say probably most popular platforms. So we're going to be looking at Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, or X now that it's called. So moving on to that, some things to consider when thinking of a platform for your goals. So just some things, how many active users are there? Is there a lot of monthly active users? What type of content do they post on that platform? Do you like doing that content, right? If you don't like doing videos, TikTok or YouTube might not be the place for you. Does your target client use that platform? And do you understand how to use it? Or would you require maybe a few weeks of exploring that platform to become familiar and comfortable with it? So with that being said, we're going to go through these. This is hopefully not too busy on the screen, but this is the monthly active users that each of those 5 platforms have. So as we can see, Facebook dominates. Facebook has about 3 billion monthly active users, so a lot, followed by YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and then Twitter comes in last place with 528 million active users per month. So as we can see, it doesn't really matter which platform you choose. You're going to have a large exposure with any platform. So there's a huge potential for growth, generating referrals, selling products, all that stuff. So in terms of age demographic of who's using each platform, we're going to go through each of them. But on this page here, we can see that we have Facebook and Twitter. Facebook predominantly, and as we'll see with all of the social media platforms, the main age group is 25 to 34. Sometimes it's 18 to 24. So younger demographic of individuals using it. So I forget who it was who said in the chat, but reaching a younger demographic, absolutely. If you're trying to reach, Gen Z, millennials, it's on social media most likely. So as we can see here, Facebook predominantly with 30% of users being 25 to 34, and Twitter, same thing with nearly 40% of users. And fun fact, Twitter, 70% of users are male identified. So if that is your target group, Twitter might be the place for you. And then moving on, we have YouTube and Instagram. So YouTube is probably one of the more even distributed age demographics, whereas Instagram, as we can see, is predominantly 18 to 34-year-olds using that. And then if I'm going too fast as well, you can slow me down. But moving on to TikTok. TikTok, we can see predominantly 18 to 24 with nearly 40%, and then it just staggers down as the age demographic increases. So as we can see, a lot of younger users are on these platforms. So do we have any questions about any of that before we move on to building a following? and
Is
you can
there a
find me.
gender difference? Is there a gender difference? You mentioned the young men on Twitter.
Yeah.
Is that the primary place of gender differential, or are the other platforms, do they have a kind of leaning?
Yeah, great question. So majority of the video-based platforms are more like female orientated, but not by a lot. Twitter was the one that was like the most like drastic, where it was like, oh, but the other ones are pretty even. With Facebook, I'm pretty sure was similar and like very neutral both ways or all ways, but video-based platforms like TikTok and Instagram were primarily female dominated. Okay. If we have any other questions, I can take those or we can keep going. Totally fine either way. Okay, we'll keep going. And if anything comes up, we can just go through that as
I
well.
think we're good to keep going.
Perfect. So when it comes to building a following, so imagine you've selected your platform, you know which one you want to use. Okay, now what? What do you do now? Well, you should try to get some followers. And how do you do that? Well, first and foremost, when you're creating content, you want your content to be high quality. You want it to be engaging, capturing attention, all those things. So if you're doing a video-based content, maybe consider getting like a tripod to hold your phone or a camera or whatever it is. Because as we see, especially with like Instagram or TikTok, better quality videos typically get more exposure. So just food for thought. We also want to engage with other accounts. So that means following other accounts, specifically like mental health accounts or whatever accounts you feel comfortable following, commenting on other people's content, liking their content, sharing content. Typically, what I have found at least is that individuals kind of pay it forward. So for example, if you comment on someone's content, they might take a look at your content and follow and comment back and so forth. So also engaging with comments that you receive can be really helpful just to build those relationships. And you also want to make sure that on the platform that you choose, you're trying to use as much of their features as you can. And the reason we want to do that is because different features on different platforms are shown to different groups and get different exposure levels. And I have an example of that will be coming up soon. But just try to remember, if that platform has videos and photos and stories and lives and all those things, try to use as much of those as you can. Secondly, or in the second row, you want to establish a niche and an aesthetic. We'll get to that as well. You want to understand your platform's algorithm. So we can spend a whole lot of time talking about algorithm. I feel like algorithm is this one like, how do I do this? How do I go viral? All those things. And that's not necessarily the goal. But it is important to understand what content gets boosted to more people and why that's the case. So each platform is going to have an algorithm, and you can Google this. You can, follow other social media experts, if you want to call it that, who will explain and teach ways that you can get your content more exposure and potentially go viral if that's a goal. You also want to make sure that you're following the right accounts. So for example, I personally only follow other mental health accounts or therapy clinics, things like that. I don't necessarily follow just individuals. And you also want to make sure that you're using trending things like trending audio, trending hashtags, and content or captions related to that. And the reason we want to do that is because if we go back to the algorithm, these platforms want to show followers or their users things that they want to see. And if something is trending, that means that people want to see it. So it's more likely to get boosted to more people. So we do want to use trending hashtags and audio and so forth. So I'm going to get a little bit specific to Instagram now, but this can also be used with a variety of the other platforms. So I'm going to start kind of on the right with the circles. So we want to make sure that we're engaging with other accounts as well before and after posting. So specifically on Instagram, the way that works is if I were to, for example, comment on Barbara's photo and I say, wow, nice photo, love the content. Uh, what will happen is that she'll see my comment, and when she's scrolling in her feed, my content is more likely to come up because we have an interaction. So Instagram says, oh, Barbara and Anne know each other, so I'm going to show Barbara Ann's content. So that's why we do want to ensure that we are engaging with other content producers as well prior to posting and after posting. You also want to make sure you're posting consistently. This is probably the hardest part because it can get pretty exhausting. But you do want to make a calendar or a schedule and something that feels not overwhelming, because if you're posting every day or 2 times a day, that's probably too much, especially at the start. And you want to make sure you can maintain whatever schedule that you've chosen for yourself. You want to also define and stick with a niche. We are going to get to that next. You can use a call to action, also known as a CTA. So a CTA is basically when you tell your followers or whoever's viewing your content, I want you to do this. I want you to do something. So it could be, for example, share a self-care tip that you learned, I don't know, at some point in time. And people are actually more likely to engage with your content and comment a self-care tip. So tell your followers something or ask them to do something, and they're likely to actually do it. Use a variety of content types. We've already talked about that. And if you're using video content, you really want to try to capture the attention of your followers or viewers pretty quickly, because you want them to stay for the entire video. That will show Instagram, oh, 80% of people who view this video are staying the entire time. It must be good. It gets boosted more. Just fun fact. And now we're going to look at the type of content. So earlier I had mentioned using a variety of content types on your platform. And the reason for that is, like I said, different content types are shown to different groups. So for example, on Instagram, you can do photos, videos, also known as a reel, or stories and lives. Just for example, we use those 3 types. So photos are primarily shown to your existing followers. So you're going to naturally have a lower exposure level to those who are seeing that content. A reel or a video, on the other hand, is shown to your existing followers and others who don't follow you. So you can have astronomically high views on those videos, which means more people are seeing your account. Stories and lives are shown primarily only to your existing followers, so it helps to build rapport with your followers. So for example, I have a comparison here. So this is just my top reel. So the top reel that I've done in my history of my Instagram account has been seen 1.25 million times, that reel. And so that reel has had about 71,000 interactions with it. So very high numbers, because it's shown to my existing followers and others. And the more interactions it has, Instagram says, oh, this is really good. Let's show more people and more people and more people. So it can grow quite quickly. In contrast, though, this is my top photo post. It has reached 4,000 accounts. So 1.25 million compared to 4,000, quite a vast difference. Not to say that one is better than the other, and I definitely encourage you to not just post video content on Instagram, because you do want to have that diversity, but just to show you the difference in exposure that different types of content will have on different platforms. And yes, okay, so bottom line, you're going to grow your followers by your following by exposure. You want people to see you, to interact with your content, and they're more likely to follow. And I think the next one here is just a question. Yeah, do we have any questions about the tips?
Yeah, there's 2 here that came up related to the previous section in a way.
Sure.
One, just curious if you have any information or stats about which platforms are most popular with population specific, like queer or trans folks or BIPOC populations. Is that data available?
That's a great question. I am not 100% sure on that. I would believe so. So the sites that I was using, if I go back here, I do have at the bottom, you can see where I got the data from, and it is very, there's lots of information on there. So if we see here, there's different ones that I use. This one here is, yeah, so at the bottom there. So that site, there's a free option, and you can only search so much before you have to pay. But that site there, if you want to just like write it down, really has a lot of great information. But if, for example, that is your demographic that you want to work with, you might want to make that kind of involved in your niche. So you can create a community and kind of make content related to that. And individuals who are interested or who identify that way are more likely to follow. So that's just another tip that you can do. But in terms of which platform is potentially has the greater number or might be helpful, I don't actually have that data, unfortunately, sorry.
So I put that website into the link so folks can look up statistics on, you know, whatever the particular population they're trying to target. Somebody, Mindy here, is asking, why does it matter that you only follow mental health accounts?
Great question. So in terms of why does it matter, it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of like it's not going to hurt your exposure or anything like that. But in terms of making a professional Instagram account or professional mental health account, whatever it is, it does come down to personal preference. But we also want to make sure that we're not, for example, following potential clients. So that for me was one of the big reasons why we want to be careful that we're not following, for sure not following clients, but not following someone who may turn into a potential client. For example, if someone comments a lot on your content and you're like, oh, they follow me, I'll follow them back. That might lead into a dual relationship down the road, perhaps. So we just want to be cautious of that. But there is not necessarily anything stopping you from following a random person or following anything like that, but just err on the side of caution. I always encourage, especially with social media, we want to make sure we're not in any gray areas for the time being.
Lenise asks, how do you find trending hashtags or audio?
Yeah, that's great. So it depends on the platform you're using. So you could simply Google, Twitter trending hashtags regarding anxiety. You can get super specific. On Instagram, you can see, for example, if there's a really popular post, see what hashtags they're using. So you can kind of copy other people's hashtags. Alternatively, when it comes to audio, I know specifically for Instagram, they'll have a little arrow that points upwards if you're looking at the audio title, which indicates that this is a popular trending audio or that it's growing. You can also click on the audio and you can see how many reels there are. So if that audio has 10 reels, it's probably not trending. If that audio though has, I don't know, 15,000 reels and it's still growing, you might want to hop on that and use that audio for your content.
One more question here. Any reason why we wouldn't follow friends? For example, if it's your professional social media account, would you choose not to follow friends or people that you know personally where there's not going to be that awkward boundary issue showing up?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that, it's kind of personal preference. I personally don't, and I'm just very strict with my like social media policy. So I personally don't, but I don't see necessarily any concerns with following your friends or things like that. And odds are they're probably going to follow you because they might find your account and be like, oh, what's going on here? But I would just use discretion with whatever choice that you make. Okay. Any other questions, Barbara, or we can move on to the next slide?
Yep, we can carry on.
Okay. So we're going to talk about a niche. So there's usually lots of conversation about what is a niche? How do I define a niche? Can I post outside of my niche? We're going to answer all those questions. And any questions you have about what is a niche, definitely we're going to get to it, so you can put it in the chat as we go. But basically, it is an interest that you post about. You can think of it as a group or a community based on a topic. So here are some examples: easy homemade dinners, thrift store finds, poetry, farm life, crafts. These are just ones that I randomly generated. But let's say you have a niche that is poetry, and you have poetry. You only post about poetry. You would not make a post about the new pizza shop down the road. That doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense to post about this pizza shop if your primary niche is poetry. So we want to be cautious in what we choose and ensuring that we can stay within that kind of fence. And so, have you considered a niche for yourself for social media, or do you have one already? And one thing I will suggest is that at the start, if you're new to social media and you don't have a larger following, try to be quite specific. It's easier to maintain followers and gain followers if you already have a larger follower count. And with that being said, with a larger follower count, you can broaden your niche a little bit more and get a little bit bigger that way. But if you're starting out, I definitely encourage you to be quite specific about what your niche is and only post to that. So if you have a niche, you can feel free to share that. If not, that's totally fine. We can keep going to the next slide too.
What does that mean for psychotherapists, for example? Like if I'm sort of a generalist and I do a bit of anxiety and I do a bit of esteem and I do a bit of this and I do a bit of that. And so my niche is psychotherapy, but that's a pretty big umbrella. Yeah, what would you recommend in that, middle of the road kind of
Yeah.
experience?
It's funny you say that because right now that's kind of what my niche is, right? In terms of like, well, I do a lot of different things. And I would not to limit or be too specific, but in terms of that niche, I would encourage at the start to pick maybe one or two to focus on, just in terms of allowing followers to know, okay, this person posts this content, because they might not be interested in content related to depression or whatnot. So definitely okay to have a more broad range, but I would just encourage at the start to try to be a little bit more specific. Of course, there's no rules, so don't feel like you have to do that. But it is just a general tip that if you're trying to grow quickly, you want to be quite specific in what your choices are that way. But I don't want to limit anyone and say don't do that, because there's no rules of social media. So I'll leave it at that.
We've had a couple folks write into the chat here. Krista said she works with elite athletes, typically 17 to 14 years old, and even more specifically with hockey players. So they're all high-level athletes in sports. That's really specific, right?
Yeah.
Amy talks about, I work with neurodivergence, right?
Perfect.
And Andrew's asking, does our niche have to be psychology related?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So if you are making a professional social media account to market yourself to clients, I would encourage it to be that. And another reason why I would say I would encourage it to be psychological based is with the CRPO standards, the updated ones as of January 1st, they talk more about social media in their standards. And they actually suggest that accounts that are related to psychotherapy are the professional ones, whereas things that don't necessarily not related to the practice of psychotherapy are more private accounts and shouldn't really be accessible to clients on social media. So in terms of marketing yourself, I would encourage that rather than posting more personal, I don't know, things, if that makes sense. And if I'm understanding that question correctly as well.
Laura is asking a really great question. Have you ever posted about suicide prevention? And what do you feel could be related risks of doing that?
Mm-hmm. I have, yes. I have created, there was a video-based video, like a reel that I had posted about that. And in that reel, it was very much so outlining specific like helplines and more so along that way with resources rather than an open discussion. Some of the things that you should consider, especially when posting about potential topics that might be a little bit sensitive, perhaps. We want to be cautious of number one, who's seeing that content and what kind of comments might you receive with that content. So, for example, if you're posting about suicide resources and talking about suicidality, you might open yourself up to someone commenting that they're struggling and need support. That might put you in an awkward spot of, well, how do you now, as a therapist, respond to that comment and how do you ensure safety? So you definitely want to use caution when you're posting about topics that might be or that might elicit responses that put you in a little bit of in a tough situation. But I definitely don't think you should shy away from providing like resources on topics like that, because it can definitely be done in a way that is super helpful. You could turn your comments off. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but there are ways to do so. And I think if you're doing it with caution and tastefully and making sure that you're just thinking through, okay, what are the potential responses I'll get or what might be interpreted from this reel, you can do so safely.
I think one of the big things that you're saying here, Anne, is that if you're going to be posting about those topics that can be quite evocative, you
Yeah.
got to be ready that the disclosure could be made online,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, in general, I also think that there's just like we make protocols around other types of disclosures, I think we need to have protocols around our social media. If that disclosure gets made, you've already thought about, how am I going to deal with this? What does it look like? Do I hide that comment? Do I reach out directly? Do I ask to connect by phone? What is the duty that we might have, a fiduciary duty around that if they are making a disclosure responsive to our posts,
Yeah.
right?
And then keep in mind too, is the person who's commenting a client of yours? Because that definitely raises a lot of like, oh, how do I bring this up to the client? Because they have made a disclosure to me now on social media, but not in the therapeutic space, right? That's another thing that you should consider. So yeah, it can definitely get messy, but it's not something that is impossible to do. Just definitely use caution with those types of topics. So I will keep going.
And one more.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
sure. Yeah.
okay, one more question, which I think is worth having on the table. Andrew's like, how personal should the content be?
That's a great question. Well, considering that your clients will likely follow you, maybe consider questions like, would I share this information with my clients? Would I want my clients to know this information about me? How will it impact the therapeutic relationship with my clients? Because your clients are your number one priority. So if you post something that might impact that relationship, maybe don't, right? In a negative way, is what I mean. And definitely just consider, right, like how that might impact individuals that follow you who may be considering therapy or whatnot. For example, I can share, I just had a baby, and I did not post anything about having a child or anything like that on social media. And there's different reasons for that, but I think primarily that's just not what that social media account is used for. So for me, for example, my social media is primarily mental health based. And me posting personal information about myself doesn't really fit into the niche, right? Because it's not a lifestyle account, it's more of a psychoeducation account. But I think it is okay to definitely share parts of yourself, and just doing so in a way that takes into consideration the implications of your clients and your followers and how that might trickle into areas that you might not consider. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide here. So we're gonna just explore briefly, why do we want a niche? We've already kind of done this, but it tells your followers what they can expect, and that can also help to reduce unfollows. So obviously, if we're getting followers, we want to minimize unfollows. And so you're telling your followers, I post about this information. If you like it, you can follow. If you don't like it, don't follow, kind of thing. It also helps to develop a community with you as a contributor. So this is a big thing. You get to develop your online voice, and depending on the niche or what you're posting about, you can also be viewed almost as like an expert in that area. And not saying that posting on social media makes you an expert at all. But you do want to just be aware that if you are posting, for example, about health anxiety specifically, and all your content is about that, and someone comes and sees your content, they might say, oh, wow, Anne really knows what she's talking about. I want to work with her. And this can also lead to other collaborations in your niche, and it can definitely help make your content strategy easier. So if you're only posting about one thing or one kind of topic, it can make it a lot easier to create that content as well. So how do you pick a niche? That's usually a hot question. So we're going to go through 3 steps. The first one is just to consider a topic that interests you and is related to your practice. So this is the assumption that you are using the social media account to market yourself to potential clients. So some questions that you can consider is, what is your expertise? What is your training in? What do you know really well? What kind of individual is referred to you? Think about gender identities, age demographics, things like that. And most importantly, what presenting concerns does your ideal client come to you with? If you love working with individuals who experience perfectionism, that might be a great niche. But if you're like, I really don't like working with individuals who, I don't know, experience depression, probably don't use that as your niche, right? So assuming you pick a niche, we're going to move on to step 2. So step 2 is the assumption that you have a niche. What do you do with it now? So you want to consider what content you can make with that niche. So what would someone who is interested in your niche want to see? So for example, if your niche is anxiety, what would that person who is anxious or interested in learning about anxiety want to see? So maybe they want to see, I don't know, how stress and anxiety correlate. Maybe they want to see somatic tips to reduce anxiety. Maybe they want to learn about the evolutionary perspective of anxiety and how that happens in our body, and cortisol and all that fun stuff. So consider the content, and are you interested in making that type of content? And then the last step here is explore what other creators are doing in that niche. So one thing to also just keep in mind is your niche that you want to focus on, is it oversaturated? Is there a lot of other content creators already making content in that niche? That is fine if that's the case, but I also want to encourage you to get more specific then. So if we think about anxiety, anxiety can be really broken down to different categories, right? You could do social anxiety or health anxiety. There's a lot of different avenues that you can take. Not saying you have to do that, but it can definitely help to make you as one of the top contributors in a specific area, if that's your goal. So
Here's a
that's,
question.
yeah.
How do you know if the niche is oversaturated? Like, what are the measures to tell?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you wanted to, you could hashtag your niche and see what comes up. Odds are content creators who are posting about a niche are probably hashtagging their niche. So if your niche is perfectionism, you can go hashtag perfectionism and see what comes up. You can also, I know on Instagram, you can look at accounts, or you can look at like tags, things like that in the search bar. So if you wanted to, you could even just write in perfectionism and go to accounts and see which accounts are related to that. So of course, there's going to be tons of accounts for any niche. I'm talking like if you're posting something in your niche and there's already like hundreds of thousands of posts about that, it's already kind of been seen. Not saying it's been seen by everyone, but odds are if it's super popular, it might already kind of be out there. So it's something that you can just kind of keep in mind, but it doesn't necessarily mean don't choose that niche. It's just, it might be harder for you to grow if there's already so much competition in that area. Okay. I'm just going to go to the next slide. So now that you potentially have a niche, what are you doing with it? You want to make it pretty obvious to those that come to your content. So whether that's Facebook page, your content on Instagram or on Twitter, you want to make sure that it's kind of easy to spot what you post about. You can do that by posting in your bio. So all platforms have bios that you can do. So you definitely want to put your niche in your bio to let people know what you're all about. You only want to post or share content related to your niche. And I just want to go back to one of the questions about personal content, like posting about yourself or whatnot. Depending on the platform, there might be different avenues to do that. So for example, on Instagram, you might not want to post personal content on your feed per se, but a story is there for those who already follow you and can help build rapport. So you can absolutely post about like, going for a walk and say, oh, self-care today, right? That's kind of personal content. And that can be shared in your story, which is there for 24 hours and might be seen by some people and not by others. But that's a way that you can still build that rapport and post personal content that might not be related to mental health or psychology or whatnot. So just something that popped into my mind that I wanted to address real quick. And of course, using trending hashtags or whatnot in your niche. And of course, really, really important that you can do that can absolutely increase your exposure is collaborations with others in your niche. So for example, on Instagram, if I were to collaborate with another creator and let's say they have 30,000 followers and I have, 15,000 followers, all of our followers see that content. So that increases the exposure quite significantly. So you do want to do collaborations because it's easier to grow that way. And I think we have a question period. Yes. So any questions before we move on to CRPO stuff?
There was one question a little bit back in terms of this piece about how personal to get. And Mindy, you might need to jump in to clarify, but she's asking, is it okay to have a separate personal account, but with some personal things being posted? For example, I'm also an artist, but art can be very personal and some things I might not share with a client. So although some of the art might, I'm riffing a bit now, Mindy, so jump in if I'm off, but some of the art might seem relevant to share in a professional environment. So how do you make those decisions, and do you keep those things very separate? Here's my psychotherapy thing, here's my art thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Mindy, if you want to jump in, you absolutely can. But from what I'm understanding from that question, some things that you can consider with anything, right? Like not necessarily just with artwork, but ask yourself, like, why am I posting this? Right? Like if you have something personal that you want to post on your professional mental health Instagram account, ask yourself why am I posting this content? What is the purpose behind that? And see what comes up for you. If it's because I'm really proud of this artwork and it really helped me to express myself and I can share with clients that kind of process and how it was therapeutic, for sure. That's like awesome, right? Because we want to encourage our clients to express themselves and all those things. So that absolutely go for it. But if it's more so of, not saying this is the case at all, but that validation of getting those likes and getting those comments and getting like, oh, this looks amazing, right? Like that validation, maybe don't post that because of the intention behind it. And only you can know the intention, but that can kind of help to tweeze apart why we're posting and if we feel comfortable posting that to professional mental health accounts. I hope that.
Sure. Thank you for that. And I was actually more so wondering if I have a separate professional account, like it's not private, like you said, that people wouldn't necessarily see. So it's another professional account that is fully public, but that is posting the artwork because in that professional world, that is appropriate for it to be very personal. But other people may see it. So it's still a separate account, but it's posting that's public. Do
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I do. That's a tough one. I would say yes, that's fine. I mean, don't quote me on that. But I think that if they're two different professional accounts and you have two different roles, right? We need to recognize our own, you know, diversity and the different things that we do in our own you know, identities that we have as content creators or as humans just in general. Yeah, I think that that's fine to have those two different professional accounts. We just want to be cautious that they're not overlapping. So maybe, for example, don't follow those two accounts from those accounts. And don't, you know, comment or like from one account on the other account, things like that, just to create that separation, because we definitely don't necessarily want a large overlap if you are concerned about some of the content that might be posted in the artist account. I hope that makes sense.
I have
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
a great question. I know folks who are writers and psychotherapists, and I've seen some people whose websites have like, hi, I'm Barbara the therapist and I'm Barbara the writer. And then people can transition into whatever they're looking for. But it's very clear this is they're creating a presence as an individual in the whole of who they are. I have also seen people who have those completely separate. My writerly accounts and when I'm publishing and trying to make a name for myself because I write novels, for example. I don't personally, but let's say I did. And they create a whole sphere of connection around themselves as a writer, which is very different than them as a therapist. But those people who I've seen who have done that separately have asked themselves this question: what am I going to do when the client comes to me and says, I read your book, I think you're amazing, I want to see you as a client, or I love your art, and or a little bit like curious about you and want to get closer to you and come to you therapeutically. So I do think if we have a public persona, whatever it is, alongside of, you know, as an artist, as a writer, as a whatever, alongside of the therapeutic presence, then we have to be prepared for some pretty nuanced boundary thinking and how to effectively manage that. I'm going to read a couple more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
How many hours a week do you dedicate to maintaining your social media, and what would be a suggested weekly commitment for beginners?
That is a great question. I'm going to be honest, since having a baby, not a lot of time. But when I was very much more consistent and active in posting, I had a 3-day-a-week posting schedule. So I would post like a photo post on Monday, and then maybe a reel on Wednesday and a photo post on Friday, or another reel on Friday. So I was only posting 3 times a week. However, it takes time to create the content. Especially video content can be tricky to do. So keep in mind that your time creating the content, time engaging with other accounts prior to posting and after posting. And you're more likely just to find yourself on social media more because you're being more diligent about posting. So I would say when I was in the thick of it and building my following and really dedicated, I would say I was probably spending, in terms of content creation and posting, 15 hours a week. It literally is like a part-time job. So I would say 15 hours a week. And what can be helpful is to like batch create your content. So you create tons of content in one sitting. And kind of letting good enough be good enough. You don't need to make A+ content or A+ posts or videos every single time. So using that to kind of lighten the expectations. But I would say if you're starting out and you're really curious and you're really interested in creating content and being specific, I I would recommend that you expect that you're going to take anywhere between 5 to 10 hours per week just to get started. Of course, if you want to, you can spend more time, but that's probably a realistic expectation in terms of time it takes to create the content, post the content, engage with others, um, find other content that you can comment on, things like that, responding to comments. Yeah, it's a lot, but it can be super, super helpful and you can build some really awesome connections. So I don't want to scare people with how long it takes, but prepare yourself that it is a time commitment for sure.
And one more question from Andrew. And Andrew, I'm going to ask you to speak to this if you can. I'm not sure I'm going to understand it completely, but you're asking, what do we want to elicit in viewers? Should we post a challenge, education, informing, humor, depending on the population you want to engage with?
Yeah.
Uh,
So, oh, sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Speaking to that, I guess I'm trying to envision a post, let's say on Instagram, and it has a survey about opinions. Do you like this or do you like that? Or am I presenting this is a mindfulness technique, try it on your own? Or Gestalt therapy is this? Or haha, funny client story, this happened. What do we do?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is kind of a call to action. So when we kind of say things like, here's a mindfulness exercise, give it a try, that is really great because you're informing your clients of like, you can try this at home and let us know how it goes. So that can absolutely increase interactions. So individuals are more likely to comment if you tell them to comment. But we also want to consider with calls to action, are people going to be comfortable commenting? So making your call to action something super easy to do, not personal, things like that. You can absolutely use humor. I know for myself personally in my social media account, it is professional, but there's also a little bit of humor. In my reels, I like to make sure that it represents who I am as a person in a professional stance. So I would encourage you to, yeah, if you like to use humor and that's kind of who you are, you're bubbly, you're personable, yeah, use a little bit of humor. Let that show through in your content. I hope that answers your question, Andrew. If not, you can definitely clarify and I can try again.
That very much does. I would only maybe focus on the challenge part. So in terms of posting something challenging, something that elicits a reaction, um, something that a person might wonder about, and you're providing a response. So here is a statistic about breakups. Here is a statistic about self-harm. Are these topics we want to go into at all? Or are you leaving kind of an open table for people to generate some attitude towards a response? Or are you
Yeah.
already prefacing one?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So in terms of that, I think just using caution, right? I have seen for sure other therapists post on Instagram or social media about kind of challenging topics in a way that is super tasteful. So it is definitely possible to do, but make sure you're considering and thinking about the implications of that post. So if you're posting about breakups and statistics and things like that, what could some of the negative implications be about posting that?
So what kind
And
of response do you get?
yeah, what kind of responses might you get? That's a great thing to think about. You might be surprised that you don't get a lot of responses because maybe that's a really like a hard topic for some individuals. So you might not have the interactions you're hoping for. Just keeping that in mind. But as long as you're doing it tastefully and you're considering, okay, what are the implications about that, and having some resources in the event that someone does reach out to you and says, this here was really really challenging for me. Can I talk to you about it? Right? What do you do then? Will you talk to them about it? Do you have resources that you can give to them? Because that might very well happen with some of those more challenging content posts.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
There's a question here from Pat. Since these are global platforms, is there a way to connect specifically with Ontario followers?
No, unfortunately not. That is one of my biggest hurdles with Instagram is that, I'll be honest, nearly more than 50% of my followers are American. So that significantly limits those who might be able to work with you. It doesn't limit those, for example, who can do a workshop with you, but in terms of clients, it might shrink that pot a little bit. So no, you can't necessarily like refine that. You can post in your bio, like for example, I'm pretty sure I have in my bio therapy for Ontario citizens or residents. So that can encourage specific individuals to follow and reach out. Like you're not going to have individuals from New York reaching out for therapy when we know we can't work with them. So that's just an example, but no, unfortunately, you cannot necessarily make sure that your followers are from Ontario.
And a follow-up question, it's interesting you're talking about this already. Amy is asking, how many client referrals are coming to you through your Instagram? And how many followers did you get before they started translating into referrals?
Yeah, great question. So I'm so happy you asked that because I actually forgot to mention this earlier. But in terms of individuals coming to me and becoming clients, you'll be surprised it's very low. I'm talking probably 5 or less. However, my Instagram has significantly made consultations more likely to be successful because individuals will probably find me on Psychology Today or wherever and say, oh, she has an Instagram account, because I make that really obvious. They check me out on Instagram, they see my content, they agree with my content, they like my content, they already have a rapport with me. Then we have a consultation and they're already eager to start working. So it almost refines the consultations to be more successful. And that actually happened this week where I had a consultation with a woman and I informed her that I have a social media account that's a professional mental health account. And I went over my policy and she said, oh yeah, I saw you on there and I knew I wanted to work with you. So that's why I reached out, and she waited almost 6 weeks for the consultation. So keep in mind that Instagram or any social media platform can really serve different purposes, and it might not be the referral source, but it's almost a verification of who you are as a person, your expertise, the content you post, who you work with, and that alone can make your practice more successful in that regard.
I might add into this, it also depends on who you're accessing. So for example, at Redbird, we've had other folks where their target market is very, very specific. So a particular language skill. And where that language as psychotherapists in Ontario, there's very, very few of them. And so we've had associates who have single-handedly built their practice through a very refined target population because they had such a specific niche. And in that specific niche, they could directly access folks who were a fit. So I think that's one of the things, like the more specific you are and the more you have direct access to that niche market or that niche population, the increase in referrals actually, I think, is quite notable. And I think it sort of supports what you're saying here about why do we need to be clear about our niche and how unique is our niche, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, Barbara, about kind of having that corner on that niche definitely helps. Okay, I'm going to keep going just for the sake of time so that we can just get out of here, hopefully 8:30. We're not going to do a quick break. Sorry, folks. We are going to keep on going. So with CRPO considerations, we're going to go through these 3. First, we're going to start just broadly, ethical and non-ethical use of social media. Then we're going to go into the professional practice standards, and then we're going to finish with professional misconduct. So quite fun. So jumping in, to be very clear, it is your responsibility to ensure that you are adhering to your regulatory bodies, rules, regulations, standards, all those things when you're using social media. And the following slides are more, things to consider and what I have found, but they are potentially not thoroughly all that you need when making a social media account. So please use caution because you are in a position of more authority. So you need to be very cautious about your use of social media. And we're going to start with just a little bit of a chat. So you can put into the chat some ethical uses of social media as a therapist, some non-ethical uses. We can just do this quite quickly if we like. If not, we can definitely go to the next slide. But you can definitely feel free to put in some things that are like, yes, we can do this on social media as a therapist, and some things that maybe we should not do on social media as a therapist. So we'll just give maybe 30 seconds for that. And then Barbara, if you want to read some out, if some come in.
One thing I know is, we can't out our clients on social media. That would not be ethically responsible.
Absolutely. One thing that I have seen on social media, which I'm not too sure if this individual was with the CRPO, I would assume not, but they posted a client testimonial, and we are not allowed to do that. So that is a non-ethical use of social media to advertise yourself. So we need to be cautious about those things. If nothing's coming in. Oh,
there's a yes to psychoeducation.
Yes.
That would be a responsible use.
Absolutely.
There's a yes to, highlighting the services that you provide.
Awesome. Yeah. So on the next slide, I do have a bunch of them. So we'll just go through this just for the sake of time. So yes, ethical use. You can share truthful, relevant information. You're connecting with other professionals if you want to do that. Your content adheres to the standards. You're not posting things like testimonials. And you practice a critical understanding of how your social media page may influence your existing clients or those who might be interested in working with you. Some non-ethical use would include connecting with your clients through social media. So, messaging them or whatever. We want to be very cautious about things like that. If you're providing false claims or false information, that's a no-no. If you're sharing content that might be off-putting or seen as distasteful or dishonorable, just have caution with that. If you respond harshly or aggressively to comments, probably not the best thing to do. And that will happen. You will likely get comments that can be quite rude. So you want to make sure that you have your own kind of self in check when it comes to responding to those, if you choose to respond to them or if you just delete those comments. But things to consider.
Amy has said that we're not able to make recommendation of books as per CRPO requirements. Do you know much about that?
I don't actually, in terms of recommending books. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that, but that could definitely, I could see that, right? Because if we're kind of prioritizing a certain book, especially if there's an affiliation, if you provide a link and maybe you get some of the commission or whatnot from that, but yeah, I'm not too familiar with that one, but I'll have to look into that. Any other comments there, Barbara?
Nope, good to go.
Okay, so in terms of the standards, these are the ones that I guess they updated effective January 1st. And what's so great about these is that it's a lot more, it includes a lot more about social media. So the CRPO is starting to recognize that therapists are using social media and what can we do in terms of keeping everybody safe. So these are just very general. So if we're looking at the standards, obviously you're using your title correctly. You're not calling yourself a doctor or things like that, if that's not the case. General conduct, you are treating others with respect. You are not being unprofessional. And the CRPO states in quotes that conduct unbecoming can also include online behavior. So how you behave online also matters. You are not a separate person online. So keep that in mind when you are responding to comments or if you're posting content that might be questionable. Dual relationships. So we want to make sure that we are maintaining our professional boundaries. CRPO says both online and in person. So it can be really helpful for you as a therapist to develop a policy about social media. What do you do? What don't you do? For example, I do not interact with clients whatsoever on my professional social media account. I don't follow them back. I don't interact with their comments if they comment. I don't look at their accounts. No interaction. And I tell clients that at the start of therapy, which is one of the recommendations here. So the third bullet point is to develop a policy around social media use and to communicate that boundary with your clients. And so in my consultations, I inform clients of that, and I note in my consultation that I have done that, just so there is lots of safety around that part. Like I said earlier, keeping your personal profiles and social media private and only using professional social media platforms for activities relating to psychotherapy. So I interpret that to mean psychotherapy content and whatnot. We also want to make sure that we're avoiding online relationships with our clients. So that includes our clients, their family members, or individuals that might be close to them. And the CRPO just gives caution about potential boundary crossings. So they say that liking, friending, or following your clients or them following you could potentially be seen as a boundary crossing. So just to have caution with everything that you're doing on social media. Electronic practice, we're not using social media platforms to provide therapy. You're not doing therapy through Instagram Live or anything like that. Keep therapy in the therapy space. And we want to also make sure that we're using caution when creating content that is accessible to the public. So that, of course, goes for any social media platform, or even if you have a blog post, right? If you have a blog on your website, just have caution with that information. Advertising. So the CRPO defines advertising as any message that's communicated in a public medium, like social media, that's intended to influence an individual's choice, opinion, or behavior. So you can advertise yourself for sure through your content, or you can do paid advertisements, things like that. So just consider that what you're posting is truthful, accurate, factual, verifiable. You're not just making things up. Making sure that you're not using testimonials, because we are not allowed to do that. When you're advertising, you're not promising something that is not able to be delivered, all those fun things that we know. And then interestingly, all websites or social media that's owned by you, the registrant, needs to be labeled as such. So it needs to be clear that you are the user or the owner of that platform. And if you are doing any paid placements, it needs to be identified as a paid placement. And this is all from the CRPO. So you can definitely check this out on your own time if you have more questions about that. But any questions so far before we go into misconduct?
There's just a bit of a discussion going on in the chat right now. So I have a professional account, and it's okay for a client to follow me. That happens a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Not okay for us to follow them. Also not okay for us to engage with them. We're not going to chat. We're not going to have private messaging through social media. And you are going to inform them of that when you start the therapy work with them.
Yes. That is personally what my policy is. I would encourage to be a little bit strict, because social media can be such a gray area that you want to make sure that you know what your policy is and that's not really being crossed. So right from the outset in your consultations, inform your clients of what your policy is. And also keep in mind that you want to tell your clients that you have that social media account before they might come across it themselves, because it might be off-putting actually for some clients if their therapist has a large following. They might not feel comfortable with that because it might seem like, are you more of a content creator? Are you going to use my story in your content, right? Like there might be some of those concerns. And I have heard of clients who don't necessarily want to have a therapist that has a social media account for therapy or that has a large following. So it is important that you are just open about your use of social media, because some clients might not like that actually.
And there's a little follow-up, and then so if we have a personal social media client, account, we're going to decline clients from following us if a client finds you personally. One of the things I think we're all would choose to do that. We don't want clients entering our personal space. But one of the things we can think about it, or what are the containing features, or what are the ways in which you set your privacy on the different platforms so that your personal social media accounts aren't accessible to the public in general, so clients just never find you. So for example, I have a personal Facebook account, and it's just like the only people who find me are friends. Right.
Yeah. So some things that you can do is you use a different name. So my personal Instagram account does not have my name on it. It just has like 2 different names put together, like nicknames that I have. So personal friends might be able to find it, or I would just follow them. But a client would be very unlikely to come across my personal Instagram account. And for Facebook, just making sure that your settings are pretty tight. And you can also use a different name, or if you have a middle name that you want to use, and maybe just like part of your last name or whatever it is, you want to put some barriers that might stop clients, because they probably are searching you on social media, if we're being honest. So try to set some barriers that make it more difficult for them to find you. And maybe if they do find you and they do request to be your friend or follow you, have a conversation with them in the session, right? Because we don't necessarily want to just leave that in the air, because assuming you're not following, you're not friending them, that can then lead to, okay, well, why aren't they? Are their feelings going to be hurt? Things like that. So I would bring that back into the therapy space and very gently have that conversation with them.
And Pat has asked interesting 2 questions. 1, do you cite sources on your psychoed posts? And 2, have you personally experienced any sticky or tricky situations in terms of ethics or boundaries?
Yes and yes. So I do cite my posts. So I love to use Google Scholar because it's free and accessible for anyone. So usually under my post, like in my caption, I explain whatever it is. And then I very clearly say, this is not therapy. Professional mental health support cannot be substituted with Instagram or something like that. And then I also have the link or the title and the authors, and encourage individuals to use Google Scholar to access that material so that it's free and that they can check out what I'm talking about if they'd like to. And in terms of sticky ethical situations, yeah, there has been a client disclosure on Instagram from a client of mine that I then had to figure out, okay, how am I going to address this? And making sure that I had adequate supervision to talk about what happened, how to prevent that from happening in the future, and then how to bring that up with the client in a safe manner for the client and myself. So we definitely want to avoid those situations and document those situations when they happen.
Charlotte is asking, is it best practice to change our name on our social media platforms, our personal ones? Right now, her security settings are pretty tight, but she has her real name.
It's up to you. I personally use my middle name and my last name on Facebook, and I haven't had any client interactions that way. But again, if your settings are super, super tight, that might be good enough. But I think it's not a bad idea to use a different name or to use different part of your name, perhaps. But it is really your preference when it comes to safety that way.
That's all the questions in the chat.
Okay, so we're almost done, so we should be good for time. But in terms of professional misconduct, so this is from the Psychotherapy Act 2007. So this is very general. You've probably already seen this list before, but I just went through and kind of selected the ones that were relevant. So obviously, if you are not adhering to a standard of practice, that is professional misconduct. So if you're posting content that goes against the standards or doesn't adhere to the standards, that is professional misconduct. If you are making a claim about a therapeutic approach or modality, remedy, all those things, other than a claim that can be supported, that is professional misconduct, right? So we're not just saying things because we feel that that's the truth. We have professional, we're using citations, things like that. We're not assuming something because we feel a certain way about it. We also want to ensure that if we are advertising ourselves in paid advertisements or just through our content, that what we are saying is not false and is not misleading. And then no testimonials, we don't want to do that. And we also want to make sure that the conduct that we have online is not going to be regarded by someone else in the profession as unbecoming or dishonorable. So that is what I have for the professional misconduct. So keep in mind, like all of these things can be applied to social media use. So your conduct matters in your therapy space, your space out in the world, and your online world as well matters. So everything you do, keep in mind you are representing the profession, and we want to do so to the best of our abilities. So quickly, your next steps, what can you do from here? So you want to define your goals for using social media. What do you want social media to do for you? You want to define your target audience, which is probably your ideal client. You want to choose a social media platform and become familiar with it. You want to define your niche. You want to optimize your bio so you can research how to do this. And some say that your bio is your most powerful tool on social media because it's likely what people see first when they go to your account. So you want to make sure it's really good. You want to develop a content strategy and an engagement strategy. So do you use call to actions, or do you just do you not use call to actions, basically? You can research how to do that as well. You want to generate content and post according to your strategy that you developed in step 6. You can research this too. We don't have time for all this. This could be another like 3 or 4 workshops. And you do want to try to use trending content in your posts. So I will go to the next slide, but this is recorded, I believe. Yes, it is. So we can, you can always go back and rewatch this if I'm going too fast here. So any questions, you can contact me. That's my email and my website. And I am offering social media coaching too. So you can feel free to send me an email and we can chat further about what that might look like for you and the steps to do so. And next, I'm going to hand it off to Barbara, who is just going to say a few words to finish up.
I just really want to say a huge thank you. There's lots of people in the chat saying thank you to you, Anne, and how helpful this was. Somebody had to leave early and said, in the first 15 minutes, I learned more than I ever knew before. Melanie just thanking us for our generosity and offering this, and you offering your knowledge, and Redbird making this space available for us to learn. I think the more we gather as therapists together and the more we learn together and share what we know, the stronger our community is and the stronger we are all as individuals in our therapeutic practice. So, really hats off to you. Big thank you. And I just want to say to those folks who are still here, Redbird Therapy has made a commitment to accessibility for learning and both for clients and therapists. And so all of our workshops are offered free of charge. And we are just so grateful that so many folks have chosen to offer their time with such generosity and kindness, and keep that flowing, you know, the really goodwill that is here. And I wanted to let you know about a a program at Redbird Therapy that we are just now opening up for 2025. It's called Kutana Wema, and it is a program where a group of folks go to Mombasa, Kenya. We are partnered with the Wema Center, who rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate street-connected kids. And we spend a week intensive there, learning from their outreach workers, their counseling team, the social workers that are there, how they do their psychosocial intervention, how they do their trauma treatment there, and just hanging out with the kids, to be honest, is like an incredible time. The agency serves up to 150 children at any given time. And so it's this really amazing opportunity. And as therapists, it counts as CEUs if you're with CRPO, and is all tax deductible because it's an educational program. So think about it. Information is available on Redbird's website, and for 2025, we'll be going in January, early January, and our registration has just opened. So reach out if you want to know more about that. It operates as an educational opportunity and a fundraising initiative to keep them stable. And I will give a shout out to Leanne, who's part of this Private Practice Essentials, who is also here tonight, who is donating towards the Kutana Wema program as a part of her initiative with us here and for those who register in her program. So there's lots of ways you can be involved, even if you can't make it to Kenya with us. So please connect. We do international peer trauma consultations twice a year, June and September. So that's another way. Those are also made available free of charge. So lots of good things happening. Check out our website, stay in touch, and certainly reach out to Anne if you are interested in further learning and coaching. I think that's it for me. It's been a really great evening.
Amazing. Yes. Thank you everyone for coming. And yeah, it was so great to just share this information with everyone.
We will see you at the next one, March 7th with Leanne.
Thank you very much, everyone.